So this session, reconnect. So we've already been through looking at relaxing, retreating first of all, relaxing, and then retraining. That was our session today on the 4 right efforts and the hindrances. And so now we're looking at this concept of reconnection, which if you looked at your at the skill sessions outline that I gave you, is all about other people and all about ill will and hatred, and how these things can overwhelm our mind at times and cause us a great deal of suffering in our lives. Because let's face it, the spiritual path, or life generally, would be very, very easy if it wasn't for other people. Just imagine if other people weren't getting in the way, things would be so easy, so wonderful. And I wonder, maybe a show of hands, is there anyone in this room who has a difficult person in their life? Challenging, yes? You already know who they are, don't you? Challenging person, yes, right, yes? Is there anyone in this room who is a problem person for other people? Yeah. That's the thing, isn't it? If you were to get rid of that problem person, would life be good? If you could just get rid of them, disappear them, what would happen? Would all this ill will, would all this hatred disappear from your mind? No? More than likely, another one will just pop up. So we have to understand that this is a tendency of the mind, and in the Buddha's teaching, ill will is something that comes up in so many different forms. It's one of the hindrances that we looked at today. It's one of the unwholesome thoughts that we looked at previously. It's one of the anusayas, the underlying tendencies that we have as humans. Even babies have the underlying tendency towards ill will. It's one of the fetters that keeps us in a state of defilement. It's something that holds us back. There's so many different ways that ill will comes about on the Buddha's path, and in so many different forms. Because if we think about this mind of ill will, there's like a scale that happens. There's a scale, from mild irritation, mild annoyance, to large amounts of annoyance, to resentment, to hatred, anger, hostility, violence. All of this starts with the mind of ill will. It's one of those things that causes so many troubles for us, and yet we don't understand very well how it works. So what actually happens with this mind of ill will is that we have an object that we come into contact to, usually another human, sometimes a computer, whatever. And this object of aversion means we don't want to interact with it. We don't want it near us. We don't want it in our life. And what happens is that mind of attention keeps going to that object. We keep on giving this object of aversion attention. And this is called the ahara, the nutriment. This nutriment feeds the ill will. So the more we pay attention to it, the more angry we get. Classic case is my father. He's getting old now and living in suburbia, in the suburbs of Sydney. Any sounds just seem to reverberate for kilometres. So if there's a party like 4 kilometres away, he can hear it. And he keeps on paying attention to it. Oh, this party, this noise, this irritation develops. And then he keeps on paying attention to it. Resentment, annoyance builds in his mind. He keeps on paying attention to it. He gets angrier and angrier. I think he's actually walked around the neighbourhood before trying to find a party. I guess he'd probably call the police and shut the party down. So this is kind of like this ill will. I mean, other people are just having a good time. And if he was just to ignore it, if he was to stop paying attention to it, his mind would be calm and peaceful. And it's the same for all of us when we encounter an object of ill will. There's a moment, perhaps, when we're able to decide whether we're going to go with it or not. But the moment we go into it, it starts to build. This irritation becomes annoyance, resentment, hatred, anger, and that's why it's called a hindrance, because when the mind is subject to these hindrances, it's like the mind is swamped. It's like a tsunami of hatred, of ill will in our mind, and it's very difficult to get out of it. So as you know, I've been asking the internet for advice on Buddhist teachings by looking at memes, and of course, all in the intention of helping living beings. I've been spending my time on the internet. So there's lots of ways we can become annoyed with people. Contemporary society offers so many potential areas of disappointment, irritation, conflict. So this is a kind of like a mild irritation kind of thing. But the internet is so full of hate, so much to look at. And this is the kind of way we look at the world, really. You know, people annoy me. Wait, no. Things people do, this is what people say, it's not people, it's the things they do. But it's like, no, it's not, it's the people. But the problem is, as I suggested before, the people change. So starts to cast doubt upon our perceptions a little bit, because sometimes someone can annoy us a lot, but then at other times they don't annoy us. So maybe it is the things that they do. Maybe it's not the people. Maybe it's just us. We also know that problem people, those people that you've got in your mind, those difficult people, they have friends as well. So maybe they're not difficult to everyone. Even the most difficult people, even the worst dictators like Hitler, they have friends. He had friends. So is it something to do with our perception, maybe? Sometimes we can get very angry with people. This is the most innocuous that I could find on the internet. There's so many other good ones that weren't appropriate, unfortunately. So this anger, it kind of builds. You know, we start to lash out, and actually this is the problem with our hatred. Maybe we can't control it, and we end up lashing out at people or at things. But the problem for us is that it feels so good, doesn't it? It feels so good sometimes to hate on someone, to have a good beach session with some friends about someone we don't like. You know, it feels so good. We feel alive. You know what that is? It's the bubbling, that hot water we saw before in the image of ill will, bubbling inside of us, making us feel energized, making us feel invigorated with this energy of this hate bubbling inside our hearts. And so we think, yeah, this is something that, you know, we like, something that keeps us warm, something that we enjoy. But it's wrong, poor Grumpy the cat, it's wrong. Because, as Master Yoda tells us, anger leads to hate, and hate leads to suffering. And you can feel this when you're hot and bubbling. You know, you feel exhausted afterwards. The Buddha gave a wonderful set of images under the heading, Things That Please Your Enemy. 7 things in the Anguttara Nikaya 7s, 7 things that will make your enemy happy. So if we do these things, we've lost. They're happy, we're not. Do you see where we're going with this? So the first one, and I love the way the Buddha appeals so sensibly to us. The first one is that we look ugly. When we've got hate in our heart, we look ugly. If you could see yourself when you're angry, when you're yelling at someone, you look like a toddler, red in the face, with this pure, malevolent hate on your face. You look like a monster. So ugly. And if this isn't a reason alone to get rid of hatred from our heart, I don't know what is. So the Buddha, first of all, appealing to our vanity, to our ego. Do you want to look ugly? The second thing that will please our enemies is that we can't sleep. So you probably experience this when you get upset with someone, when you have a conflict in your life. You go to bed that night and the mind is just churning away. I'll show him. I'll let her know how I really think. How dare she do this? Next time I see her, this is what I'll say to her. And we go on, and we're buzzing. It's that boiling water in us, kind of that energy. It means we can't sleep. And the worst thing, of course, is if you don't get a good night's sleep, you don't get your beauty sleep, so therefore you look even uglier. So this is the second thing that will please our enemies. The third thing is that we don't profit. So nothing good comes of our anger. Nothing good. We don't benefit in any way. So a good example might be when my friend couldn't work his phone and threw it against the wall. Angry, and of course he didn't profit from that. Not only could he not use the phone, he lost his phone and he had to spend more money to buy a new one. So we don't profit from our anger. And you can see this also just in our relationships. When we're angry, we don't have good relationships. They're not beneficial. We don't enjoy them. We can't profit from good interactions with people. If you're a salesperson going into a room and you're full of anger, resentment, hatred, I don't think people are going to buy your goods. You're not going to profit. So that's the third thing. The fourth thing that pleases our enemy is that we lose wealth. And a good way to think about this could be something like, is it Nick Kyrgios? I don't know how to say his name. I've only ever read it. Or Bernard Tomic, tennis players. So when they get angry, they throw their rackets around, they cuss the judges. They don't, not only do they not profit, but they lose wealth. And this is the fourth thing. They lose wealth. Or I remember reading about a road rage incident where this driver decided to run down a bicyclist who fortunately wasn't injured, but he had to pay a huge fine, and he also damaged his car, so he didn't profit and he lost wealth. And even in the time of the Buddha, if you kind of went and did something terrible, like you broke someone's property or you hit someone or damaged something, then you had to pay the king. You had to go and give your money to the king as like a punishment. So even in those times, you didn't profit and you lost wealth. The fifth thing is that we develop a bad reputation. So that's true too. When people are angry or full of hatred, we always hear about it, don't we? And so we lose a good reputation. People speak of us saying, oh, that person's always so angry, the person's always so full of hate. And of course, the next thing is that when we are full of anger and hate, people don't want to be around us. So we lose our reputation and we lose our friends. We lose our family. No one wants to be around a person who's angry. And you feel this, you see this in your own life when you come into contact with people who are hostile, people who are angry. You just take a step back, you're like, whoa, keep away. And so it just goes to show, We'll lose our friends if we're angry. We'll get a bad reputation. And the last thing is that we will always experience bad results. And it's true. If you get angry, the guy who hit and ran with the bicyclist who crashed his car, he experienced bad results. He went to prison. When he was in prison, he wasn't working, he lost wealth, he had to pay a fine, he didn't profit, he got a bad reputation. I read about him in the newspaper, and I expect that, people around him really questioned being friends with this person. Who wants to be friends with someone who could mow you down at any moment? And I expect that as a result of this, he had poor sleep. And I imagine that in the moment when he was going for that cyclist, he looked ugly. So these are the things, the Buddha said, that would please our enemies. So these are the drawbacks of anger. These are the drawbacks of hatred in our heart. So we need to have some strategies to deal with anger when it arises, and some strategies to deal with it in the long term. So the Buddha, of course, has given us some good similes, and I've got some pictures. So the first thing he says, when we encounter someone who is difficult, maybe they've got bad actions that they do, maybe they annoy us with their bodies somehow, like they might steal, or they might hit someone, or they might just annoy us, but they have okay speech, they've got nice speech. The Buddha says this person is like a dirty rag. So you see my robes here, we've got these patches on these robes. In the days of the Buddha, the monks used to wear patched robes. They used to walk around, and if they were to see a good-looking rag on the road, they think, hang on a second, I might need that rag. And so they'd spread this rag out, and they'd look and they'd see, okay, this part is dirty, but this part is clean. In the same way, when we look at someone who has bad bodily behaviour, but their speech is okay, when we see their bad bodily behaviour, it's like seeing the dirt on the rag. So the Buddha says, what do? What does a rag-wearing monk do? They tear off the bad part and throw it away, and they keep the good part. So the Buddha says, stop paying attention to the bad qualities, focus on the good qualities. So the first time you hear this, you think, oh, that's very beautiful. It is very beautiful. And you think, but then you think, is this just denial? Are we just deluding ourselves further? And the answer is no, because what we're doing is not trying to blind ourselves to people's bad qualities. We know their bad qualities. They're manifest right in front of us. But if we're going to have a good interaction with them, what we need to do is to balance our mind. So most of the time when we've got problem people, difficult people in our life, that's the only way that we can see them. But we know that other people see them differently. We know that at certain times, even we see them differently. And so it's important, if we want to remove hate from our heart, hate from our mind, that we balance these problem people's problems and see their positive sides, just like a dirty rag. So next time you come into contact with that person, see if you can spot some good qualities. The second type of person we're likely to encounter is someone whose speech is bad, whose the speech annoys us, but perhaps they've got good qualities in their bodily behaviour. So the Buddha says with a person like this, it's quite easy actually, isn't it, to get bothered by people's verbal behaviour. They say something that annoys us. Maybe it's a slightly veiled insult, or maybe it's a criticism or something that annoys us, and we become hot and bothered. We start bubbling with that anger again. And so when you're hot, when you're bothered, what you want to do is to cool down. So the Buddha says it's like if there's an angry person who's hot and bothered, they want to cool down, they want a drink of water. And so they come along to this pond, but the problem is the pond is covered in slime, in algae, in water plants. So this is like the bad qualities of speech that we see in these people. So what do? We brush aside those bad qualities, brush aside the algae, and drink so that we can become cool, so that we can slay our thirst. It's not that we're saying these qualities cease to exist, but we need to have that coolness. We push aside those bad qualities and we drink in what good qualities we can see. In the same way, the third type of person we're likely to encounter is someone who has bad bodily behaviour, bad verbal behaviour, but from time to time they have this placidity, maybe they have some openness in their heart, and we can see that. And the Buddha says this is like water that has gathered in the hoof print of an animal. So here we have an animal's hoof print and there's a bit of water left in it. And we are hot, we are thirsty, we want to drink some water. And so, how do we get the water out of this hoof print? If we try to scoop it up with our hand, we're likely to mix it up with all the mud. So what we need to do, and this is showing just how far we need to go, we get down on our hands and knees and we suck that water up, just like an animal does. We suck up the good qualities of that person. We put aside those bad qualities, we get down there and we suck up these good qualities so that our minds don't have that hatred. Our minds don't have that aversion, that resentment, that ill will, so that we can cool ourselves. Probably you've got people like this in your life, yes? People who have some small good qualities that we can suck up somehow if we pay careful attention. The fourth kind of person that we're going to encounter in our life doesn't have any good redeeming qualities whatsoever. So they have bad bodily behaviour, bad verbal behaviour, and they don't have that placidity of mind, they don't have that opening of the heart. They're just bad from start to finish. So there's a little shift here in the way that we have to deal with these people. So previously we developed some metta. For those last three people, it was kindness that we were looking for. We were trying to find their good qualities. They had something that we could latch onto and make use of. But with someone like this, there's no good qualities that we can see at that particular moment. Might change, but there's no qualities that we can see at that moment. And so instead of having kindness, what we need to have is compassion. And so compassion is just this letting go of any vested interest in their well-being and just wishing them peace, wishing them safety, wishing them good luck in their life. Not getting too involved, just developing a mind that says, okay, good luck, peace be with you. And this person is like a traveller in the desert who's sick, who's injured, who's walking a long way, they need medicine, they need help. And so you think, may they find peace, may they find the medicine they need, may they find safety, may they be well. And this is the way that we can remove resentment, remove hate from our heart for this kind of person who has many bad qualities. It's not easy to take the hate out of our hearts. Sometimes when you hear these kind of teachings, at first you might think, yes, it's wonderful, but then when you think about it, you're like, hang on a second, he hurt me, they really upset me. Or perhaps you have some really toxic, negative relationships in your life, maybe a history of abuse or violence. So for those kind of people, these methods may not be appropriate for you, or these methods might be something that you apply at a certain time. Perhaps if you've had a bad interaction recently, you might not be able to apply these methods, but later on, perhaps you'll have some space in your heart. And we do this, again, not for their benefit, although it will help your relationship with them, but for your own benefit, so that your mind does not become overwhelmed with hate, with anger, with resentment. And it's so easy to have these kind of mind states, even towards good people, even towards friends, even towards teachers. The Buddha himself, people didn't always like him. People said bad things about him. They had bad attitudes towards him. They complained. They didn't have respect towards him at all times. And so we know that even the good people in our life can sometimes irritate us. The good people in our life can sometimes annoy us, even if they have really good qualities. They have good qualities in their body, in their speech, and in their mind. We can still become upset with them. So with a person like this, and this is the fifth person, the Buddha says, think of this person like a cool forest pool. So again, we're hot, we're thirsty, we want to cool down. And so with this kind of person, we plunge into this beautiful, cool pool, and we bathe, we relax, we enjoy. And when we get out, we lie down in the shade and we relax. So this is a simile for enjoying the good qualities that this person has, basking in their good qualities. And this is a way that we can remove resentment, remove anger from our hearts, and focus on these beautiful things that are going to give us a different state of mind, some comfort, some pleasure, some joy about the behavior of people who are positive and beneficial in our life, so that we don't have that resentment, so that we don't have that anger. So these are some methods. This is called the Agahata Vinaya Sutta. It's in the Anguttara Nikaya 5, and it's called Overcoming Resentment. And it's one of my favorite suttas. I think it's very beautiful. So this is what we're doing here. This is the space sloth. And he's saying, we seek to understand their suffering. So when someone is rude and hateful towards us, and we're in a good place, it just rolls right off. It doesn't affect us. This is the aim. This is the ideal. And sometimes you need to be in a good place to be able to do this. You need to be feeling strong, stable, and you need to be in the right frame of mind. But other times, this could be very difficult. So that's one strategy that we can do, that shifting of perception. Another strategy the Buddha talked about is kind of like an optimistic strategy, using things could be worse kind of approach. And this is the story of the Venerable Punna. So Punna was a monk at the time of the Buddha, and he was going off to live in a faraway land which was very dangerous. And the people in that land were renowned to be very violent, very cruel. And so the Buddha's a bit worried about this monk going off to live in this savage place. And so he says to Punna, what are you going to do if the people in that place verbally abuse you? And Punna says, he's an optimist, he says, I'll be very happy that they abuse me. I'll be very happy. I'll think, these are good people. These are good people. And I'll be just very happy that they're not throwing clods of earth at me instead. And the Buddha's like, well, what if they do throw clods of earth at you? Well, I'll just be very happy they're not roughing me up with their hands. Well, what if they do rough you up with their hands. Oh, I'll just be very happy that they're not throwing things at me. Or what if they do throw things at you? Oh, well then I'll be very happy that they're not throwing sharp things at me. What if they do throw sharp things at you? Well, I'll be very glad that they're not sticking me with weapons. What if they do stick you with weapons? Oh, these are good people. I'll be very glad that they're not killing me. What if they do kill you? Oh, well, then I'll be very glad. Some people, they want to die and they have to go and find an assassin. But here I am, an assassin comes to me. So this is maybe not a recommended kind of strategy. I don't think this is meant for us to be like, just allow people to throw clods of earth at you. I think what this story is about is just kind of going, okay, things could be worse. I think about my father again. I think, sure, they were playing horrible dance music in the neighborhood. At least they weren't playing Justin Bieber. Or if they were playing Justin Bieber at 12 a.m., at least they weren't playing Metallica at 3 a.m. So you see how we can kind of play with our mind a little bit, changing the way we look at the situation. Things could always be worse. And that's something that can give us a little bit of comfort in a bizarre kind of way. So that's another strategy. One more strategy the Buddha gives us when we're dealing with difficult things is to lower our expectations. People are going to disappoint us. People are annoying, difficult, strange. They make us uncomfortable. This is what people do. This is the nature of people. And the story that goes along with this strategy is from the Dhammaka Sutta. It's a story about a tree deva, a tree spirit. And this tree spirit has the most wonderful fruit. Let's just say figs, giant figs in the tree. And one day, a person comes along and they see these giant figs and they think, oh, I might have a giant fig. And so they climb the tree and they eat their fill of figs. They fill their bag up. And as they climb back down the tree, they break off a branch. And then the tree deva, the tree spirit, comes back and is so upset. So upset. Someone has stolen the fruit and ruined the tree. And so the tree deva says, right, that's it. No more fruit for you, like the soup Nazi from Seinfeld. No more fruit for you. And so what happens is the king and all the subjects of the kingdom are like, what's going on? Where's the fruit? And so they go to the king of the gods, Saka, and they say, hey, look, tree deva has stopped providing us with figs. Can you sort it out? And the king of the gods is really upset and he looks down and he sees why this has happened. And so what he does is he sends a huge hurricane, a huge wind, and it destroys the tree. So you can imagine if the tree spirit was upset before, now the tree spirit is distraught, positively distraught. And so the king of the gods, Saka, he comes down and he says to the tree deva, what's happened? What's happened? I've just destroyed your tree. And the tree deva says, well, this person broke my branches and stole the fruit. And he's like, the king of the gods says, when this happened, were you practicing the Dharma of trees? And this means, do you understand what it means for a tree to exist in this world? He says, the leaf cutters come and they cut the leaves. The bark cutters come and they take off the bark. Fruit pickers come and they pick the fruit. Branch collectors come, they collect the branches. And this is what it means to be a tree. This is the Dharma of trees. So what Saka the Gods is saying, what else do you expect? People will come along and they'll take the leaves, they'll take the bark, they'll take the fruit, they'll take the branches. This is what it means to be a tree. In the same way, this is what it means to be a human. People will come along and they'll annoy us. They'll irritate us. They'll destroy our happiness if we let them. So we need to understand this is just what humans do. And so in this way, we don't take it too personally. We don't take it to heart. This is just someone who's trying to take away our leaves, trying to take away our peace. Let them have it. Let them take it away. This is lowering our expectations. So another method that we can overcome resentment, overcome hatred, is to apply some antidotes to our hate. So most of you know that a common antidote for ill will is metta, loving kindness. This is one of the 4 immeasurables, 4 Brahmaviharas that the Buddha taught, that existed even in the time before the Buddha. So this is a mind state that is limitless, it's immeasurable, it's vast. And if we have this mind state, it can completely wash away all of the anger, all of the resentment, all of the irritation. The problem is, if we still have resentment in our heart, then the metta, the loving kindness, will not be pure. Which is why the Buddha taught these methods of overcoming the resentment. Because if there's still resentment, then it's not 100% loving kindness towards the whole universe. And this is a common problem for Buddhists, a common problem for meditators who practice metta. So we say, and I've had people come up to me and talk about how they practice loving kindness, and they send out loving kindness to the universe, to everybody, except him. There's still some resentment towards that person. So that means that that metta, that loving kindness, is not pure. And the Buddha said about this kind of person who has some resentment still in their heart, he said, no, this is not the practice of metta. This is not what it means to practice metta. Loving kindness is the complete absence of hatred. So that might be an antidote, but it might be a strong ideal for us to develop a mind like that. So we need to be aware of this lingering tendency of resentment and ill will to exist in the mind. I don't think it means we can't try to practice metta, that we can't try to give loving kindness to the entire universe. I think it means we have to be realistic about what we're doing and not kind of bypass these resentment, this hatred in our heart, not delude ourselves that we're some enlightened beings projecting love out into the universe when we've still got these problem relationships. Because actually that's where we need to apply our effort. That's where we need to apply our diligence in removing that resentment first, because this is the way that we prevent more from arising in our heart. So this is the right efforts that we were talking about before. So you might apply metta, you might apply compassion. This is the second antidote the Buddha talks about. And if you know your 4 Brahmaviharas, you might expect the next one to be... No? Huh? Sympathetic joy, yeah. So mudita is called. But no, in this list of antidotes to resentment the Buddha provides us, we don't go down that third path of sympathetic joy. And the reason why is probably when we don't like someone very much. It's very hard to enjoy their happiness. So it's very hard for us to rejoice in their good fortune. If someone you don't like in the office gets that promotion, you're like, yay. If someone you don't like wins the lotto, you're like, oh, it's very hard to enjoy their good fortune. So we don't use that in this list. Instead, what the Buddha says to do is develop this equanimity, just looking on, very even-mindedness. We don't kind of love them, we don't hate them, we just try to stick in the middle on this razor edge, just like, okay, I'm not going to fall into this trap of giving them love because I can't, but I'm not going to fall into this trap of giving them hatred because that's bad for me. So just even-mindedness, very, the word equanimous, very equal in the way that you look. And the fourth thing the Buddha says to do in this little list for overcoming resentment, applying these antidotes, is very sensible, just ignore them. And this is actually a pretty good strategy too, because it means that you're not going to get caught up in, you're not going to have an interaction which produces more negativity in your mind and which could at any moment spill over into hatred, violence, or whatever. And I'll just tell another couple of stories to finish up this topic. And it's the story of what happens when our anger arises. And it's the story of what happens when we don't watch the mind with those 4 right efforts, when we don't make this effort to prevent unwholesome states from arising, to abandon unwholesome states that have already arisen, and then develop new wholesome states and maintain those wholesome states. So it's very, very easy when life is going well, when people are treating us well, to have wholesome minds towards people, to have a wholesome heart, to have good vibes towards that person. But when they become difficult, what happens? And this is the story of my favourite character from the suttas, Kali, a maid servant, and her mistress, Videhika. So Kali has this mistress, and this mistress has a good reputation for being kind, for being generous, for not being harsh. But Kali the maid, she's a bit of a troublemaker, and she thinks to herself, hang on a second, does my mistress Videhika, does she only have this reputation because I am good at my job? Because I do my work well? She doesn't have to hate me, she doesn't have to have a problem with me, because I'm doing the work of being a good person. So she thinks, I wonder if there is any hatred in my mistress Videhika. Let me test her a little bit. And so the next morning, Kali the maid doesn't get up for work. And the mistress Videhika's like, Kali, what's going on? Why aren't you up? No reason. And the mistress is like, and Kali thinks, ooh, I think I saw some irritation in my mistress. Why don't I test her a little bit further? And so the next day, Kali doesn't get up. And of course the mistress is like, Kali, what's going on? And she's like, nothing. And this time the mistress gets a flash of anger across her face. And so Kali thinks, ooh, unarisen anger almost came out. Why don't I test her a little bit more? And so the next morning she doesn't get up, the mistress is angry, and she says bad words to Kali. And Kali's like, ooh, there is anger in her. It's not just that I do a good job to make her happy that she doesn't get angry. She hasn't removed anger from her heart. Why don't I test her a little bit further then? And so the next morning she doesn't get up, mistress gets angry, she yells, and she hits Kali across the head with a rolling pin. And so finally, Kali is satisfied. The anger in her mistress has finally come out. The anger that she knew was there has come out, has surfaced. And so she goes out into the streets, bleeding from her wound, and she says, "See what she's done, my mistress, this woman of good reputation, this gentle Vedehika, look at what she's done to me." And so you see the truth there about what pleases our enemies. Bad reputation for Vedehika. The whole village now knows about her anger. The whole village knows that she beat Kali, so she loses her good reputation. The reason this anger arose in her was because Kali became annoying. When Kali was lovely and easygoing, when she did her job, it was really easy for Vedehika to be all peaceful. And this is something for us to learn about on the spiritual path. It's really easy when everything is going your way, when the people around you are nice and lovely, it's really easy to be very spiritual, to have a heart full of metta, to look at these people with eyes of love and compassion. But when they become difficult, that's when we're tested. That's when our spiritualness is tested. And that's where we really need to apply our efforts so that we really, truly can take out this anger, this resentment from our heart. So in a way, when we have to deal with these difficult people in our life, it's a kind of blessing, because it shows us that actually we still have some work to do. And it tests us. Can we, in the face of difficult people, remain calm? Can we maintain a mind that is free from the defilement of hate, anger, ill will? And so, to finish off, some similes that the Buddha uses. He says, we need to develop a mind that is vast. Just like those minds of metta, loving kindness, karuna, compassion, mudita, sympathetic joy, even-mindedness, equanimity, upekkha. We need to develop these kinds of minds if we really want to have a heart free of ill will. And the images that he uses are quite good. He says, if someone was to come along with a shovel and go to a mound of earth and say, I am going to make this earth not exist. I will make this earth not earth, and starts shoveling away. He wants to get rid of all of the earth on earth. But the problem is the earth is vast. It's very difficult with a shovel to remove all the dirt from the world. So in the same way, when our mind is vast and purified with these beautiful mind states, it's very difficult when someone comes along with a shovel when someone comes along with some anger, for it to affect our mind. They can just keep shoveling away, keep digging away with their irritation, with their irritable ways, with their annoyances. And if we have a vast mind, a mind that's really open and wide, it won't affect us. They can't pick away at our peace of mind. They can't pick away at our love, our kindness, an ideal, perhaps. The second image the Buddha uses is the image of someone trying to draw, to paint, in the air. So I don't know if you've tried this yourself. Try to paint in air. Doesn't work. Why? There's nothing for it to stick to. In the same way, if we can become Teflon, things just slide right off us. It can't stick to us. Who wants it to stick to you, this anger, this ill will, why would you want that to stick to you? So you just let it slide right off. This is the second method the Buddha talks about. The third is to imagine that someone is coming with a grass torch and they want to set fire to the river Ganges. So, of course, the river Ganges is very wet and it's not very easy to set fire to the Ganges River. Another image the Buddha uses is, and this is the image which is the title of the sutta that I'm drawing these similes from, is the image of the saw. So this sutta is called the simile of the saw. And in this image it says, if someone comes at you with verbal abuse, bad words, they call you names, then even if they were to take a saw and hack off every limb, you would not give rise to anger. You would not give rise to hate. And again, this is one of those images where you think, wow, this is pretty special. Okay, right, people coming at me with anger, just hack off my arms, hack off my legs. I'm okay, I love you. And the Buddha does say this is not meant to be taken literally. So when they come for you, when the zombies come or whoever comes, you don't just give yourself up and say, take my limbs. No, this is a way for us to consider. This is a way for us to think. And he says this is specifically only about verbal abuse. So he says at the end of the sutta, so if you can imagine this simile, then there's nothing that you could not endure of bad speech that comes your way. And so these are some powerful ways that we can try to develop the mind. These are pretty ideal ways. It might take us some time to get to a state where we become vast, like the earth, or we become Teflon, or we become so wide and wet that when people try to set the fire of anger alight in us, it doesn't hold any sway. Or if people come with bad words and annoy us, that we don't react. These are pretty high ideals, but they're what the Buddha says that we can work towards in our life if we want to remove anger and resentment from our heart. And the last image I'll leave you with is 3 similes the Buddha used to talk about anger. And he says there are 3 types of people in the world that can be compared to an inscription. The first person, when they have anger, is like an inscription drawn in rock, carved in rock. So this person, when they have anger in their mind, keeps it there for a long time, doesn't let go easily of this anger. Carved into a rock, lasts thousands of years in your heart. The second person is like a line drawn in sand. So this line will eventually be washed away by the waves, or the wind will eventually blow the sand and the line will vanish. This is like the middling kind of anger, holding on to it for a middling amount of time. But the best type of person, the Buddha says, in regards to anger, is the inscription drawn in the water. As soon as you draw it in the water, it vanishes. And this is how the Buddha tells us to practice. And again, it's an ideal. Sometimes it might be very difficult. But sometimes, if you practice in this way, you might find that it can also be easy. And so, Space Cat, obviously spent far too long on the internet looking for memes. Space Cat says, when someone is rude to you and it has no effects, this is what you're like. You're like out there in vast space, cool, you've got your sunnies on, just floating away. And this is the animal I'll leave you with. as a kind of mascot for your anger. So I offer this as a reflection for you tonight. We're going to have a 5-minute break, and then we've got the question and answer sessions to come. So please go and use the bathrooms, have a stretch, and we've got another hour or so to go. So I think there's still a few people lingering, but there's like 1,000 questions in here, so I'm worried if I don't make a start, we'll be here to the morning. If we don't get through them all, we might allocate a little bit of time tomorrow, perhaps, because there's nothing worse than having questions unanswered, is there? So I'll make a start and people can just drift in. When meditating, random memories from way back pop into my head. Why is this? Usually it's because these things have made an effect on our mind, and so there could be sometimes memories of something a little bit intense in our life, something traumatic, things that have really made a deep impression, or they could just be things that have been triggered by a sequence of memories. So these things don't tend to arise just on their own. When you have some clarity in your mind, you can see the way these things appear and disappear, and you can see the causes for them appearing, and you can even sometimes track back a little bit. So it's never usually completely random, and sometimes it's even just like a feeling tone or experience that you're going through triggers a memory. These memories are usually not very important, and that's why it's easy for us to just let them go. And the more you meditate, the more you see that this pattern of behavior, this mental pattern of behavior, doesn't bring you any benefit. And so this is why we say at the beginning of the meditation session, letting go of the past, letting the past be. And it's not that we can't learn any lessons from the past, it's more that we can't affect it. And sometimes it's difficult for us to acknowledge that our memory is now almost a complete fabrication of our mind. That the details that we think we remember, I mean, there's so many experiments done on memory and how faulty it is, like police investigating accidents and the witnesses can't even agree on the colour of the cars involved, you know. The memory can be quite faulty, and usually every time we remember something, we remember it in a way that usually shows us in a good light more and more, or that colours this memory in such a way that might not bear any relation to the actual sequence of events. So the problem for us is that we actually can't trust our perception until we've got a really, really beautiful, clean mind. And so these memories that pop up, I reckon just acknowledge them, that they're there, and give yourself permission to let them go. And what happens is this tendency of the mind to reach out to new experiences, old memories, this eventually, with more practice, subsides, and these thoughts stop appearing in the mind. So in the meantime, we use this wholesome strategy that I talked about today, the simile of the peg. We hammer out the old thought pattern with the new thought pattern. The new thought pattern is putting the attention and the awareness on a wholesome or a neutral object like the breath. That's what we do with random thoughts. Don't pay too much attention to them. When I begin to meditate, I notice my heart rate increases. My breathing becomes shallow. Almost a state of anxiety occurs in me. How can we begin to control this? Well, trying to control it is just going to make the anxiety worse. What we need to do is just relax. So it sounds to me like there's perhaps some fear, maybe even some grief in your heart. And so when we sit down, when we stop being busy, we stop arranging our life to ignore these things that are there. And when we sit down and look, we see the state of mind that has been existing there all along. I know that when I became a monk, I thought that I was pretty cool at life. I thought, I don't have any anger in my heart. But then I saw in my practice that I did actually have a lot of anger in my heart. What had happened was that instead of being busy all the time and arranging my life so that I could avoid problematic people, I, at the monastery, couldn't avoid people who I had difficulties with. And so then I could really see that this anger was there all along, but I'd just been covering it up. And sometimes it's the same with anxiety or fear or grief. It can be there, but we haven't dealt with it. But what I would say to you is just to acknowledge that it's there, and in acknowledging there's this shallow breathing, a sense of anxiety, we can let it go. And one way that we can let it go is to know that these things don't last forever, that anxiety is a fear of the future, or a fear of things happening even in this moment, making us more anxious about the future. So just acknowledge and let it go, and the breathing will calm the anxiety. And if you do have anxiety, it's good to check out the internet for a list of things that can help you, some strategies to deal with anxiety. And one of them that you'll find listed quite commonly is to develop mindfulness of breathing practice. So I'd say stick with it. Don't worry. And also, just because it's happening now, doesn't mean it will be happening tomorrow or in the future. So you can let it go. Oh, what's happening here? What's my background? What led me to Buddhism? You are enlightening. That's very nice. This one doesn't say anything. My background is, I guess you're asking maybe about my work background, perhaps? So I used to work in cultural institutions and museums and with young people a lot, and that was quite stimulating and very invigorating. I really liked working with young people because they are so fresh and so open to new ideas and different ways of doing things. But I was attracted to Buddhism when I myself was a young person, many, many years ago now, and it really didn't make much sense at the time. Growing up as a boy in the suburbs of Sydney, I had a really strong tendency towards the spiritual. Started practicing yoga when I was 12 or 13. And I remember going to the travel agent with my mother and seeing all these magazines of Thailand, usually, and monks and stupas and things like that, and kind of collecting them and keeping them in a little stash I made of this weird collection of things. But it wasn't until I first did a meditation retreat when I was about 19 that it started to make sense to me. And that was that the meditation was really beautiful. And at that moment I knew, and this is the true story, at that moment I knew I wanted to become a monk, but I was like 19. And so I thought, oh. So I lived a non-monk life for many years and gradually brought my spirituality into the center of my life. So we keep spirituality at the periphery of our life, and that's what I was talking about today, like where are your priorities, where are your spiritual priorities? If you keep your spirituality at the periphery of your life, then, and you keep your work at the middle, then you're never going to reap the benefits of a truly spiritual life. And for me, that occurred when I started teaching yoga full-time, and I really got a sense that the spiritual life was the life that I wanted to live, and that gave me the confidence that I could become a monk and that it would work. And so far it's been okay, and yeah, I have to say it's a very beautiful way to live as well. While meditating, sometimes pretty boring. Pretty boring plans related to work. Well, that's your problem. Thinking about work comes to mind. What type of hindrance is that? How can I get over it easily? So this is okay. This is the habit pattern of your mind. You've spent 5 days a week, 7 hours a day, many, many years working, and this is what happens. It's like that image I used today of the train traveling very fast. You pull the handbrake. It takes a long time to slow down and stop. But the good news is, the longer you spend away from work, the less those thoughts are going to occur. However, you may stop making plans about work, but you might start making plans about redecorating your room. So what that mind is and what that hindrance is restlessness, wanting to do something. So the Buddha said that this mind is like a slave driver. So when we have the hindrance of restlessness in our mind, we are the slave. And it's like, think about work, make plans for work, make plans for redecoration. And we're like, okay. And we do it. This is the hindrance that treats us like a slave. And so this is what's happening to you. You have a small hindrance, and the longer you meditate, the longer you spend away from work, the less it will have. And the more you meditate, the more skillful you become in your meditation practice, the less likely these hindrances are going to arise in your mind. So when they do arise, the trick is to recognize them. This is a hindrance. Remember those 5 things? This does not lead to good results for me, does not lead to good results for others. It does not develop wisdom. It obstructs wisdom. It leads to vexation, problems, and it doesn't lead to enlightenment. So when we see in this way using wise attention, we recognize a hindrance is there, and it's very easy for it to let go. At the beginning of our meditation practice, if we haven't been practicing a long time, or if we practice infrequently, these hindrances can become very strong. But the more you practice, the more mindfulness you develop, the more you see with wise attention, then these hindrances, when they appear in the mind kind of looks at it like a laser. It's like, choo! You see it as a hindrance and it vanishes like that. So that's something to look forward to as you keep on practicing. Would our mind explaining the benefit of silence for meditating and for meal times? We have chatterboxes in the dining hall. How can they be talking if they're meant to be eating? So the benefit of silence is that the mind can become quiet. So most of our lives we spend talking about anything at all that comes into our head. And sometimes it's useful, most of the time it's not very useful. And on a meditation retreat, we really want to reserve communication for times when it's really useful and not use communication when it's not useful, so that the mind can become quiet. For us, coming to a retreat like this, it's quite difficult to make that transition from a life where we talk a lot, talk about anything, talk about the weather, talk about the food, talk about this, talk about that. It's very difficult for us to make that transition sometimes, but it's something that's worth sometimes practicing with, because when you do, the mind can become so quiet. Even your internal voice quietens down. But if you have conversations with people about this or about that, when it comes time to sit down again, you're still having that conversation. You're remembering that conversation. So that's one of the drawbacks of talking on a retreat. This is a retreat also to do with friendship, kalyana mitta. So if you make friends in the dining hall, lovely, good. Maybe go away from other people if you want to have a chat, so that other people can maintain their silence and get some peace in their meditation. How to meditate without falling asleep. Also, is there a state in between being conscious and unconscious while meditating? It's like I could hear your voice, but I feel like I am sleeping. Usually this hindrance, and it is a hindrance, sloth, torpor, tinamida in the Pali. This is a hindrance because it causes us to sink down. It takes us away from the present moment. So this hindrance will appear when we are tired. And I would bet that if you've been working and you've got a really busy life and you got up at 4:30 this morning, that you will have some tiredness in your mind. So if this hindrance appears, sometimes you just need to go and have a little lie down or a little nap, and it will disappear. And that just means you've been tired. Yeah, you're just tired. But if after you get up from your nap, you still feel tired, that's when you know you've got a real hindrance to work with. So if you're tired and you fall asleep, good, you're relaxed. If you've been meditating and listening to my voice and you can still hear my voice, but you're still feeling relaxed, good. The body is relaxing, the mind is becoming calm and peaceful. You're still aware, but you're not reaching out. So that's fine. That doesn't mean you're unconscious or in between. It doesn't mean you've gone away to another dimension. It just means that the body is relaxing, the mind is becoming calm, and your mind isn't reaching out for objects. That's okay. Don't worry about these hindrances too much. They tend to vanish over time. Oh, dear Venerable, thank you. That's very nice. Short. Good. Hope all the rest of the questions are that short. No? Yes. What is the Buddhist perspective on mental health? Is depression something we allow to happen to us? All of the Buddhist path is dependent on causes and conditions. So all the things that we experience in life originate from causes and conditions. Our experience is conditioned. So everything is kind of contingent. That means kind of leaning up against something else. And so things like our mental health are dependent upon external causes and conditions, as well as internal causes and conditions, and they merge. So if you're in an environment like, say, a crazy capitalistic society at the end of time, like we are now, then it's quite a difficult environment to be in. If you have to work all day in a job you hate, go home to a family who's busy and stressed, and live a life like this, then it's quite likely that depression might arise in your mind because of the external conditions, and because when we are challenged in our life, we start to have internal conditions that become adverse. There's also patterns of thinking. I know I've been depressed in the past, and I know that it's in result of causes and conditions, and the ways that I've dealt with those causes and conditions. So if we're not careful, these things can become very deeply entrenched. And it's quite common, these neural pathways in our mind. Science looks at these and says it's kind of like footprints in the sand. The more people walk in those certain places, the more entrenched those neural pathways become, the more entrenched those thought patterns become, which is how we have depressive behaviours, depressive thinking. So the good news is that the brain is quite plastic. And when I showed you that chart so many hours ago now this morning about the benefits of meditation, one of the things it said was that the brain plasticity can become more plastic through meditation. That means that we're able to change the way we think through meditation. And sometimes all it takes is a little bit of joy coming into the mind can completely disrupt those old thought patterns of behavior. And so that's why with people who are depressed, what's happened is the serotonin uptake in the brain has become inhibited, and you don't feel happy anymore. You can't generate happiness by yourself. And that's because of the way that the thinking patterns are occurring. And that's why often people will take medication so that they can start to reconnect the synapses that lead to happier ways of thinking. So depression is something that we can deal with through meditation, and also through counselling or even with medical practitioners. But there's no one cause. There's nothing wrong with you. This is just something that comes and can also go. I made a bad decision concerning my son. Years have passed and he has still not forgiven me. Will he ever? how do I deal with the guilt? You have to forgive yourself first. If you've made a bad decision, you have some remorse in the mind, some regret, and this will chip away at your happiness. So you have to somehow forgive yourself. One way to think about this is that the decisions that we make at any given time are the best decisions that we can make at that time. They may not be perfect, but we tried our best, we did our best, and that's all we could have done in that situation. Sure, with the benefit of hindsight, we look back, oh, if only I did this, if only I did that. But this is pure fantasy. We just have to accept we tried, we didn't know, this is what happened, and forgive ourselves, knowing that our own actions were conditioned. We were a product of conditioning from our family, our environment, our society, and these are the things that led us to make those decisions. It doesn't mean that we aren't involved in our decision makings. It just allows us to understand why things go wrong in our lives sometimes. So forgive yourself. Reach out to your son and let him know that you still care, and try again. And if it doesn't work, it's okay, you tried your best. That's what I'd suggest. And good luck. What does it mean to be enlightened? Well, I wish I could tell you. What does one achieve? How does one achieve enlightenment? How does one know when they have become enlightened? What happens after you are enlightened? So, that's very good questions. What happens when you're enlightened is that you have three knowledges that are a deep insight into the true nature of reality. And you need to have a very powerful and refined mind to achieve these things. What happens is all the defilements, all the hindrances in the mind are suppressed, and all the enlightenment factors, things like joy, happiness, mindfulness, samadhi, and equanimity, all of these things are very powerful. And all of the hindrances, all of the defilements are burnt away, all of the good qualities, the enlightenment factors are strong and reach their full power and fruition. And then these three knowledges occur at the moment of enlightenment in sequence. So the first one is knowledge of past lives, all the past lives that you've lived. So when the Buddha attained enlightenment, the first thing he saw was all of these lives going way, 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 way back. He said there is no beginning to be discerned. And so this is a knowledge of the suffering that we have in our life. This is the Buddha's insight is the true depth of our suffering. So you think you've got problems in this life, wandering around, from job to job, from lover to lover to whatever. This is something that we've done life after life after life after life after life. And this is what the Buddha saw. So this is what he talks about in the first noble truth, the truth of suffering. So he says this is one of his enlightenment knowledges, the truth of suffering. These lives, countless tears from this wandering in samsara, this existence, going round and round and round in this cycle. This is the first knowledge. The second knowledge is the knowledge of karma, why this suffering occurs. So this is the cause of suffering. And so he looked back and he could see this is why certain lifetimes that he lived, when he did these certain actions, they had these certain results. And so when he did good actions, he could see this, they had good results. When he did bad actions, he had bad results. So this is how he understood the cause of suffering. And this is why those two methods of thought that we looked at today, they might seem pretty basic, wholesome thoughts, unwholesome thoughts, but actually they're very profound, because when you see with that vision that he had he could see exactly what actions would lead to good results and exactly what actions lead to bad results. And he was able to distinguish those, and he was able to tell us so that we, by paying some attention, could follow his path and reap good results of our own, hopefully leading to better destinations. So he said things like generosity, love, compassion. These were the kind of good actions that led to good results for us and good results for others. This is what he saw as the second insight knowledge of karma. And the third insight knowledge he had was knowledge and vision of release. So this means that he became aware of his enlightenment. So it's kind of like, I guess an easy way to describe it would be like a voice saying in your head, okay, you've done it now. And this is the knowledge of enlightenment. And the last question here is, what happens after you're enlightened? Well, you're pretty blissed out, I suppose. You don't have any defilements of the mind. You don't have any hindrances. So you just chill out and enjoy life, being happy and enjoying the pleasures of meditation. One way to test if a person is enlightened, and I've been doing this with various people I meet all my life, is to try to get them angry. So if you come across a person and they say that they're enlightened, see if you can make them a little bit angry, and then you'll know. Thank you for your stories and teachings. A longish observation and a short question. During walking meditation, I habitually labelled left, right, with an upward inflection on left and a downward inflection on right. I suppose this is like left, right. Similarly, in breath meditation, I tend to label in upwards in pitch and then downwards in out. I played during walking meditation with changing the inflections on the labels. I tried inflecting down on the left and up on right. This slowed me down and made the walking feel more grounded. If I inflected upwards on both left and right, the walking seemed more continuous and I walked faster. Question: have I noticed differences myself or others in meditation with how they pitch the labeling of their states? I think that it's interesting what you've been doing. You've become aware that you've got a certain habit and a certain practice. And what you've done is you've decided to disrupt that and try to change it up. And this is a useful thing to do because habits are actually a great deadener to us in our practice. And if we keep on engaging in the same habits, we'll always pretty much generally get the same results. So it's good to mix things up. Ajahn Brahm says, why don't you try brushing your teeth with your left hand? And what you're feeling about being grounded is actually you're feeling more aware, more present, because you were consciously trying to change something. You're more engaged with the object of meditation. So it's good to do things like that. I reckon it's probably also good to just relax, and sometimes habit can be very comforting, but sometimes we need to challenge it. So just see how you go with that. And the purpose, of course, of all of this is just to lead to more peace and more quiet in the mind. So if we start analysing too much, we might be walking away from our meditation object and into speculation and all these kinds of things. Is travel good for the soul? I think so. Yes. Go on holiday. When meditating on a 10-day retreat as a beginner, my physical body disappeared and I was pure energy with no boundary. Can I explain this? Because I wasn't in your body at the time, I can only guess. But this is one of the experiences that many people have when they meditate. So you have this feeling of the body kind of fading away and the structure of the body, as you know it, dissolving, and you feel like you are pure energy. And so maybe this is a kind of insight into the energetic nature of our body, that we're vibrating atoms, that there's this constant change, this flux within the body. So you might have become aware of what's called the Vedanas, the feeling of the body without feeling the body, if you know what I mean. So there are very deep states of meditation that are able to be experienced. And the more and more you practice meditation, the more likely you're going to run into something wacky or mind-blowing, or both wacky and mind-blowing. And probably it's good not to get too attached to these experiences, because even the most interesting, wonderful, amazing, blissful experience doesn't last forever. And with a state like this, which has no boundary, and you feel really expansive, you feel really good, you might start craving that experience again and again, and you'll be disappointed when you don't get it and frustrated in your practice. So what I do when I have crazy experiences is I kind of like, okay, that was a bit out there, and then I just let it go. Because the experience itself might have some sort of information for me, but it's not something that I can cling to or hold on to. It's not something that happened because I made it happen. It was just something that naturally occurred, a process. Many people experience these kinds of things in their meditation practice. Unfortunately, it doesn't mean we're special, and it doesn't mean that we're enlightened, but the mind is interesting, the body is interesting, and it gets more interesting when you look at it. And so that's why we see these things when we take the time to look at our mind and body in meditation. I foster cats. Yay! If everyone in the world becomes a monk or a nun, who will look after the abandoned cats, dogs, birds, etc. out there? Good question. How to let it go? We cannot just abandon them, can we? You mentioned about meditation to let go. Yep. In reality, how to let go? Especially these poor animals. Bodhinyana Monastery has a stray cat called Spot. So it's not like becoming a monk or a nun means that you no longer care for animals. Santi Monastery in Sydney has a cat, and plenty of monasteries have cats and dogs as well. So it's not like becoming a monk or nun. You just kind of abandon any concern for other creatures. You care for them. The problem with a place like Bodhinyana is it's in the middle of all this pristine forest, so we can't just take everything in, because all the wildlife would end up getting killed. So it's kind of like, oh, okay, well, rescue the cat, kill the birds. But we have to let go of things with wisdom. If there are people relying upon us, or if there are animals relying upon us, don't let go. Let go at the right time. Don't let go at a moment when creatures are hungry. So give them food. It's fine. It's okay. You're doing good things. You're looking after animals. You're developing beautiful qualities of love, kindness, compassion, generosity, and that's good. So look after all the stray animals you can. Look after all the stray humans you can. Just look after everybody all the time, and that's what it means to let go. Letting go of your own needs sometimes and putting others ahead. Letting go of others' needs sometimes and putting yours ahead. So letting go skillfully. When I say let go at the beginning of the meditation practice, I'm just asking you to leave behind the world for this moment, for these few moments of meditation, so that you can have some peace here and now. When you go back home, yes, give the cats a cuddle from me. I find myself having difficulty sleeping at night. I find myself analysing my interactions, and sometimes thoughts of worry don't seem to go away. What strategies should I take apart of watching the thoughts arise? So what strategy should I take apart from watching the thoughts arise? So you're having some restlessness at night. The strategies I would suggest is to relax the body. So to consciously relax the body to help you sleep. So this means just going through part by part like we've done here on the retreat, or listening to a guided relaxation tape, or doing even a hypnosis kind of thing. I did that so many years ago. I did this guided hypnosis relaxation, and I can still remember deeper relax. And whenever I hear that, I relax. And this is why I suggest doing the same pattern each time we come to meditate, going through the concept of letting go, being here. You've heard me say the same things, here, now, nothing to do, nowhere to go, relaxed, calm, peaceful. Why? Because of the Russians. The Russians during the Cold War were doing some research into how they could use mind control. And one of the things that they discovered is that there's this incredible power in autosuggestion. So if you suggest to yourself, relax, you relax. And what they discovered was the more you engage in this habitual pattern of behavior, the deeper that practice goes in your mind. So that eventually, when you come to sit down and meditate here, and you start thinking, letting go, relaxing the body, instead of taking 10, 15 minutes for the body to become soft, it happens just like that, because you've trained the mind in this way. And so you can develop what they call good sleep hygiene in the same way by doing things like putting aside your device long before you go to bed, because there's all this bright light coming into your eyes and it confuses the brain. It's like, okay, we're awake now, we're awake, it's daytime. So put away your device and then have a little ritual before you go to bed, something that you do repeatedly so that the body knows, okay, it's bedtime now. And then relax the body somehow, relax the mind. And that's through that guided meditation, things like that. And usually that will help you. Also, try to sort out the problems that you have in your life during the day, not at night. Not really a meditation question, but is it possible for a Buddhist to be assertive? And how? Yes. I think it's good for Buddhists to be assertive. The Buddha said you should praise what is praiseworthy and condemn what is not praiseworthy. Otherwise, what are we going to do? What are we going to do in life? We've got all of these things happening around us. They affect us somehow. They affect other people. So if we care about ourselves, if we care about other people, it's okay to have boundaries. And it's okay to say, no, you're doing something which is hurtful. No, you're causing problems for me. It's okay. I think one of the problems that a lot of Buddhists have is this idea of really porous boundaries, of being really passive. And so that means that we think, oh, it's just my karma. Or I'm so detached, these things don't affect me, but it does. Or I'm just a vehicle for their loving kindness. And I call this spiritual bypassing. Have you ever heard this term? So it means we can engage in a lot of activities, ideas, approaches to our life that we label spiritual, but are actually not very useful. Sometimes it can be a way of not dealing with actual problems. So it means that if there's someone who's really annoying you in your life, sometimes you might have to say to them, look, this is a problem for me. Because we shouldn't be afraid of having difficult conversations if it comes from a place of good. If we're motivated by a desire to hurt someone, to shame them, to humiliate them, to cause problems, to start a fight, then that's not a good way to approach the situation. But if there's a real need for you to put a boundary in place, what this will do is allow you to have a safe place to develop your spiritual practice. So if you need a boundary in your life, then you're more likely to get a good spiritual practice if you're feeling safe and comfortable, if you are feeling welcome, if you're feeling okay, you're more likely to get a good spiritual practice than if you're feeling unsafe, uncomfortable, unhappy. Yeah? Does it make sense? So if you do have to be assertive, do it with a mind of kindness. And that mind of kindness is for you and also for them. So be kind to yourself. In our spiritual practice, sometimes we do need to put ourselves first. Otherwise, we're not able to help others. And this is that oxygen mask analogy. We need to look after ourselves first before we can put the oxygen mask on others. Otherwise, we can't help. So do look after yourself, but do it in a way that's skillful and kind. What do you think about using the senses to be mindful in the moment? Yes, good, fine. So this is a good way, I should read the whole question. Focusing on a mouthful of food when eating, fine. Closing eyes, focusing on an object, sitting still, yes. Listening to what noises are around you, yes. Feeling feet on the floor, etc., yes, all good. So that is a good thing, to be aware of the body. And how we're aware of the body, we're aware of the sense organs in the body. We're using those sense organs to anchor us in the present moment, so that we can let go of them. So when we use like sounds, for example, what we're practicing is, okay, just aware of these sounds happening right here, right now. And it means that we are staying here in the present moment. Our mind isn't wandering off somewhere. So we're using senses in a way that eventually we can let them go. And it's good sometimes to practice in this way. And it's just a way of developing present moment awareness. So you can do that, or you can use a neutral object like the breath. Sorry, I couldn't hear you very well during the guided meditations. Okay. What words were you using? And can we use them ourselves? Could anyone else not hear me? Okay, I'm too soft. Okay. Got this microphone on. Okay, I will try to speak more loudly. And so the words I use are things like letting go. Are you mocking me? So I just try to have, like I said before, some kind of mantras that help me repeatedly develop the things I want to develop. So like letting go reminds me to let go of the past, let go of the future, and reminding myself being here, now, aware and relaxed. So when we talk to ourselves, like I said before, we kind of develop this skill of auto-suggestion in the moment. So there are so many different things. Find something that works for you. I think Ajahn Brahm says something like breathing in peace, breathing out, letting go. And so that's one way that he does it. Ajahn Kema, I think, uses one that I also use, which is nothing to do, nowhere to go. I don't even know where I heard these things, but somehow they got stuck and they worked for me. But find something that works for you. So that's what I would suggest. I don't think it's a good idea to use a mantra. So that means like Om Mani Padme Hum or Mani Padme Hum, or something like Buddho. It might help at the beginning of your practice, as in like at the very start of your meditation that day, to allow the mind to have an object that's very obvious for it to fix onto. But eventually that word will get in the way of the peace and stillness. So eventually you'll need to let it go so that you can enjoy a more quiet mind. So it might make you feel more present and aware, but its use is limited. So I usually just reserve my mantras for the kind of beginning of my practice, setting up that right intention, letting go. And then if I start to wander a bit during my meditation, maybe I'll bring my mind back. And one of my favorites is nothing to do, nowhere to go, because it reminds me, okay, I'm meditating, I'm here, I'm now, and this is what I'm here to do. There's nothing for me to be doing apart from this. And so that's why use that mantra, and you can use similar things to bring you back to your meditation experience. Okay, it's not too many more. Although I'm aware ill will thoughts are not good for my well-being, they still pop out of nowhere. This frustrates me. So you have ill will to your ill will. How to have less automatic unwholesome thoughts, and how not to be frustrated when they come up, and how do I let them go? So don't have ill will towards your ill will. It's like throwing petrol on a fire. So you just end up with more and more ill will. So the way Ajahn Brahm talks about this is quite skillful. He says, don't try to fix it, care for it. So what you're caring for is the quality of mind that you're experiencing with a mind of ill will. So when there is ill will in the mind, you can imagine that bubbling water, that hotness, that agitation, that is the mind of ill will. And if you know that someone else has that, you don't hate them for it. So don't hate yourself for having a bit of ill will in your mind. You're suffering. So it's good to recognize that you're suffering, but how do you approach someone who is suffering? Not with ill will, with kindness, with gentleness. So when your mind is showing these patterns of behavior, these hindrances like ill will, they're just coming out of past actions, past thinking. They're not something that you have control over. So when they do appear, just be aware of them, and instead of trying to get rid of them, trying to force them away, just relax and care for the mind. Give some kindness to the mind, and that might help. That might allow them to dissipate and stop that feeling of frustration. So it sounds like probably you're an analytic thinker, and this means that another useful tool for you will be to examine the drawbacks of these mind states. And so you condition the mind that when you see it arise, you can let it go. So don't hold on to the ill will and don't try to hold on with more ill will to the ill will. Just try to let it go, seeing the drawbacks, knowing that they're a danger to your peace. How do we start loving ourselves again when we become so lost that we forget how to do it or even why we should? Sometimes we can't do these things by ourselves. Sometimes we need a good friend. So that's why the Kalyana Mitta is something that's really good, this spiritual friend, someone we trust, someone we care about, a teacher, someone who loves us. We need to go to them and we need to tell them that we're feeling vulnerable and that we're feeling lost, so that they can show us just how special we are, and they can give us the love that we can't give ourselves. So this friendship is very important. It is very difficult sometimes when we get stuck in patterns of thinking where we can't escape from them. Feelings of hurt, feelings of regret, feelings of being lost, feelings of despair. Sometimes these things can really build up in our mind, and you can see these patterns of behavior in some people, maybe in yourself, where you become like that cat that we saw in the litter without the lid on. It's looking at the grill, thinking it can't get out, but actually there is an escape route. But because it's not looking in the right way, it's not looking in the right place, it can't see. And so sometimes that's why friends are so important to us, because they can show us that we are special, that we are valued. They can give us that love. And sometimes that's enough to kind of shift it and to let us know that we're valuable, that we're special. And yeah, we should. Yeah, of course we should feel that we love ourselves, because if we don't love ourselves, then what's the point? What's the point in developing a spiritual path? If you don't care for yourself, if you don't care for the consequences of your actions, if you don't have some fear about the future of your life, even future rebirths, if you didn't have this sense of foreboding about your actions, then you'd just do anything. You'd just behave in really bad ways. You'd behave in ways that weren't wholesome. You might even kill yourself. Who knows? Terrible things, because you don't have any interest in your own well-being. So these are really unwholesome ways to think, and they're not beneficial. So I would suggest, if you are feeling lost and lonely, seek out a friend, seek out some support, and allow them to look after you, because you are special, you are worthy of love. And maybe when you feel this, you'll be able to, by osmosis, take on some of that love that they have for you and give it to yourself. And tomorrow we'll look at some very specific strategies that the Buddha taught to give rise to minds that are positive, to inspire yourself. And I'll teach that tomorrow morning. Okay, I work with people with disabilities. Some of my clients have attention difficulties. Some have difficulties with abstract thinking. How is it best to teach them to stay mindful in the moment? I guess it's an engagement question. How are you engaging them? And are they engaged in ways that meet their learning styles? So with different people, we have different ways of being. We have different preferences. And the thing is always to find the key, what works. So if you're working with people with a disability, you've got a really wide range of approaches that you can take, because you have a wide range of disabilities probably in the classroom. So this is coming from my long ago masters of teaching, thinking that if you can develop a whole range of strategies that engage people. In the same way that here, like I tried to use some images for people who are visual learners, tried to tell stories for people who are oral learners, demonstrated walking because some people are kinesthetic learners. So there's all these different approaches you can take. But if you want to have a good chat with me, Sunday afternoon, if you looked at the timetable, you see that there's a chai chat and chill out session. So Scotty, the resident caretaker here, makes a killer chai, and I would have come on this retreat only for that. And he's going to make his world famous chai, and so we're going to all hang out, sit together after cleaning up and have some chats. So if you've got a question like that you want to talk to me about, you can talk to me about that then. During walking meditation, is it prudent to sub-vocalize internal words such as left, right, heel, toe, or to transition awareness to the sensations without associated words? I recognize the words may keep us more focused, but do they detract from a deeper connection to the body senses? In a way, yes, they do. So if you are building up your awareness in walking meditation, when you start off walking, you might say left, right, left, right, left, right. And you keep doing that until the words are no longer meaningful to you, and they'll just naturally drop away, and you'll just have this awareness of left, right, without the label. So that's a good way to work. In the same way that when we're breathing in, breathing out, we label the breath in, we label the breath out until it becomes pointless. We know we're breathing in, we know we're breathing out, because our mindfulness has developed. And the same with walking. When we develop our mindfulness enough, we just want to become aware of the sensations without the mental interference of a label. So we try to clear out as much clutter, and we just become aware of the moment without needing to label it. That's the way that I do it, and a lot of teachers I know. Other teachers recommend continuously labeling, but I find this makes the mind a bit agitated and a bit cluttered. What does it mean when you see black and white shapes or a red tiny object or anything in particular? I guess we're talking about inside meditation, so perhaps in the mind's eye. The variety of mental experiences that you can have when you're meditating, and this could be perhaps the beginnings of what's known as a nimitta or obasa, the light in the mind. So when we become very calm, very peaceful, settled, what usually happens is the body starts to disappear. We're no longer so aware of our body. It fades into the background, and we have the breath. And after a little while, even the breath can start to disappear, and then we're aware of the mind. And one of the phenomena that the mind can produce is these beautiful lights that start to appear in the mind. And it usually means that we've reached a particular stage of calm, a particular stage of mindfulness, where we can see these beautiful images. And what you do when you perceive these is you don't kind of go chasing them, because you just chase them away. You just stay still. You don't do anything. You just relax. You just know that they're there. And gradually these shapes in the mind will become more and more clear. And they may even be kind of connected to the breath. So you might see it kind of becoming brighter with the in-breath and different with the out-breath. Or they might become more and more stable in the mind's eye. And you develop these nimittas by paying attention to them. They kind of come to you in the same way that the breath comes to you in the practice that I've outlined for you on the retreat. So these nimittas, these lights, come to you in the mind, and you can use them as a basis for deeper concentration, deeper stillness rather. Concentration is a dirty word at Bodhinyana. So you develop this stillness based on the nimitta, and the nimitta becomes very, very bright, very, very powerful, and it almost looks like someone has driven a car up to your eyeballs. And so these can become very powerful states. And these are the states of mind that lead to the even deeper states of jhanas. So I wouldn't expect too much from nimittas on a 3-day retreat. But if the mind is prepared, if the mind is already in a good place, then it's quite likely the nimittas will appear. And just enjoy the nimittas. They're very beautiful to look at. They bring a lot of peace, a lot of pleasure in the mind. So just enjoy that and see what happens. And a few more questions. Is it possible in modern day society for a layperson to become enlightened in this lifetime? It is, but there's a catch. So there's many examples of people becoming stream winners. That means that they've kind of seen the Dhamma. So they have had insight into the nature of reality. And once they've seen that, they can't unsee it. And so the process, like that lotus, that process of that lotus opening is that the insights that they've had of the nature of reality will continue from life to life. And this means that they've got only a maximum of 7 lives left. So they have to become enlightened in 7 lifetimes. And there's other similar kinds of enlightenment stages, like once returners, people who come back for 1 life, non-returners, people who don't come back at all, they become enlightened, and arahants, which are enlightened beings. So if you're a layperson practicing, you can attain very deep states of meditation, you can attain some of these enlightenment experiences. But if you were to become enlightened, the stories in the suttas say that you're no longer a layperson once you attain this stage. They're very difficult to attain, these stages. So once you attain these stages, you're no longer a layperson, you become a member of the Arya Sangha, the noble Sangha. And so you have 2 choices. One, you either die and parinibbana, so it's like the final nibbana, the final extinguishment, so you cark it deliberately, or you ordain and you become a nun, become a monk. Because if you are enlightened, you have no interest anymore at all in worldly phenomena. You can't be enlightened and enjoy the worldly life. So if you see people, and there are some people out there who label themselves as enlightened beings, label themselves as arahants, very skeptical of these people. Firstly, try to make them angry. Secondly, see how they live. If they're interested in sense pleasures, if they're interested in money, if they're interested in fancy clothes, fancy cars, if they're interested in all of these types of things, then probably not likely they're enlightened, because all your desire for those things would vanish. You've seen through the illusion. You're no longer interested in these worldly things. You're only interested in the mind and the spiritual path. So yes, if you do become enlightened, and I wish you the best, become a nun, become a monk. What is the etiquette of greeting a monk, nun, abbot? How, why do you bow? It changes from culture to culture, actually. So Anusha was saying the other day, whenever a nun or a monk walks into a room and there's both Sri Lankan people and Thai people, what happens is the Sri Lankans all get up because it's regarded as a courteous greeting to stand, and all the Thai people bow down because it's regarded as polite to be lower. So the Buddha said that there was a variety of ways that you can greet a holy person. So one thing is to stand, another is to sit, another is to keep your right shoulder to them, and in the suttas they talk about circumambulating the Buddha as a mark of respect, so people would walk around the Buddha. And in the earliest temples, you see, still existing in India today, the cave temples, the stupa is in the middle of the room, and it gives a space where people could keep their right shoulder as they walk around the stupa. And the same here, you could walk around these stupas outside, always with your right shoulder, because the right shoulder, which monks have bared as a sign of respect, was considered courteous. You could also anjali, which means to hold the hands like this at the center of the chest. So there's no right way. In Thailand, people bow down 3 times, or they crouch down. In Sri Lanka, people might just bow down once. So there's no correct way. The etiquette usually, if you're greeting a monk, is to use the word venerable or bhante. Bhante just means like a venerable sir. And so if you don't know their name, you can always just say venerable or bhante. You could say Venerable Akaliko, that's me, or Bhante Akaliko, that's also me. If you're greeting a nun, we use the term Aya or venerable, and that means like noble lady. So there are 2 terms. And then you've asked here about abbots. So abbots are usually a bit higher up the food chain, and usually there'll be either a terra, which means a person who's got 10 reigns, which is how we count our age in monk and nun years. There might be a terra for a monk, or a teri for a nun, or there might even be a mahatera, which means 20 reigns. So these people have different titles. Ajahn Brahm. Ajahn is a title they give in Thailand for a monk who's had 10 reigns or more. It just means teacher. It comes from acharya. And some of the Thai monks have these really long titles. But we're all meant to be pretty humble. So if you just kind of, call us mate, I don't think we're going to get upset. But usually people think as a gesture of respect to the Sangha, which is something that many people hold in high esteem, they give a title like venerable or bhante for monks, is not considered appropriate most of the time to use the ordained name. So people, even monks to monks, we don't call each other by our ordained names most of the time, unless we're quite senior, we address the junior monks. So anyone to our left, we can call by their first name. Anyone to our right, we call venerable or bhante, kind of like a hierarchy. But most of the time we use venerable, just because it's nice to be polite to each other. And why do we bow? We bow to respect the things that we hold dear, the Buddha, the teacher, the Dhamma, his teachings, and the Arya Sangha, not just the mundane Sangha like me, but the Arya Sangha. These are the noble beings, the enlightened beings, the ones who realized the Dharma through the enlightenment experience and who have shown the way for other people. So that's why we bow. People do bow to the Sangha also as a mark of respect. Could you please share your story of your past? I think I've done that. And no, I was never was I a non-Buddhist? I guess I was a non-Buddhist. Yeah. But I was not a Christian. I was an atheist for a long time. As a child, I was quite precocious, and I remember causing quite a fuss about having to go to scripture, because there's like this default in most schools that you have to go to Christian scripture classes unless you opt out. But anyway, I made that happen. How and why did I become a monk? I think I've covered that. What is my day-to-day life? It's quite boring, actually. Yeah. But also quite beautiful. So it's very simple. And as I said before, one of the things I really noticed when I became a monk was that I was suddenly living my life at a more human pace. And I had the time to really enjoy things. And I remember one day walking around the forest and seeing all of these leaves that had fallen, and they were so beautiful. I was so happy, and I was just looking down at these beautiful leaves and thinking, this is something I would never do in my previous life as a layperson. I would just never have the time to appreciate this beauty. And it's the same with a lot of the things I do every day. You know, I have the time to really appreciate the food that I eat. I have the time to appreciate having time, and it's very beautiful. When I walk outside my little hut here, I look up and I see the stars, and I would never have had that opportunity living in the city in Sydney. You can't see the stars anyway, but these little things are such precious moments, and I think that's probably one of the things that I've learnt from a monastic life. Just this beautiful contentment in simplicity, and that's something that I really recommend we practice in our own lives, because so much suffering comes from wanting more, wanting things to be different, thinking that things should be better. But if you're just watching the grass grow, then it's a really lovely pleasure. You don't have to change channels or anything like that. We spoke about allowing the mind to do what it wants and to sit patiently and wait for it to return to the task at hand. So, who is then in control? Our soul? Our consciousness? Who is watching and waiting for the mind to return? So essentially, are we made up of different levels of thinking, thought, or consciousness? Or is it simply our earthly being and our spiritual being? I don't even understand how to ask this question properly. Hope I understand. I kind of do. I think you're saying, what or who am I? And you mentioned the word soul here and consciousness. And these are not quite the same things. Even the mind is not quite the same thing. So this is a deep and complex question for this time of the night. But I'll try to answer it very briefly, just by saying that the person who we think exists does not really exist in the way that we think they exist. So what we grasp at as being ourself are these 5 things called the khandhas. So we have the form khandha. This is the physical attributes, our body. We mistake this body for ourselves. What does it mean we mistake this body for ourselves? Well, this body is constantly changing, never staying the same. This body started off from your mother and your father. It grew up on porridge and rice. It grew. It didn't stay the same. It constantly changed. And now it's falling apart. One day you'll have to let it go. And we can see this change happening in the body, our hair falling out, our teeth decaying, our skin becoming wrinkly. So this form is changing. We can't control it. We can't say, I'm going to make this body young and beautiful again. We can't control it. So in this way, this form is not self, is not ourself. We can't control it, it's changing. The fact that we can't control it, the fact that it's changing is a kind of suffering. And this is something we grasp at, this form, we think it's us. That's why we're so disappointed when we look in the mirror and we've grown older and uglier. We can't control it. It doesn't belong to us. And it's the same for all these other things we experience and take for ourselves, like feelings. Feelings we think belong to us, happy feelings, pleasurable feelings, or neutral feelings, or painful feelings. If we look at these painful feelings, we see that they're changing. That ache in our knee isn't just this one solid pain that lasts forever. It's changing, constantly changing, and it doesn't last forever. And this pain, once we stand up, vanishes. So was that feeling us? Was that us? That pain? No. These feelings are not us. They're constantly changing. We can't rely upon them as a sense of self. Constantly changing. The Buddha says that these feelings are like a water bubble. They just vanish. So if they vanish like that, are they us? And the third thing the Buddha talks about is our perceptions. Like, can we trust our perceptions? Can you? The way you perceive yourself? Can you be sure that's you? The way you perceive your thoughts? Do you think that that's something that you can rely upon? Do you remember thinking about things when you were younger and now looking back going, oh, how did I even have that idea at all? My perceptions were completely wrong. So these perceptions are unstable, they're unreliable. We can't trust them as being this permanent, authentic self. And the other two things are sankharas, which are the mental volitions, the formations that we have that occur mentally, the will, the desire for things, the wanting, the creating. And these things are constantly changing and we can't rely upon them. The same for our consciousness. When we talk about consciousness in Buddhism, we're not talking about one singular conscience, but six consciousnesses. Six consciousnesses. And that is the six sense consciousnesses. So hearing consciousness, visual consciousness, taste, etc., etc. So these are all different ways that we interpret our experience. And we know that we can't rely upon these. In addition, we have the mind consciousness. We can't rely upon these. If you hear someone say something and your perceptions receive it and you feel a certain response and you act upon it and you think that this is a permanent consciousness state, then you'll be disappointed because it will always change. You can't rely upon it. It's not you. It doesn't last. It doesn't stay the same. And so by looking in this way, the Buddha says that the self that we perceive, the self that we think exists, doesn't actually exist in the way that we think it does exist. But he does say that there's two extremes here. It's like a mistake to think that we don't exist, but it's also a mistake to think that we do exist. So what's happening is this kind of dependent influence that all these things have on each other, and that's what forms our sense of self. But in Buddhism, we don't have this concept of soul in the same way that Christians do or Hindus do, that it's this permanent, stable soul that lasts forever. We don't have this concept. We have this concept of like a stream of consciousness, a stream of matter, or a stream of something that goes from life to life, but is not permanent in the same way that the Christian soul is, you go up and you stay in heaven forever, or in Hindu religions that you merge with the Brahma, and you stay there forever, or that soul is the soul that is reborn over and over again. In Buddhism, it's changing, constantly changing, but it's still moving. It's like a river that's moving. The river is constantly moving in this direction, but it doesn't stay the same. So that's the kind of concept of self. So what was your question? So I don't know if that makes any sense at this time of the night after a long day, but who is in control? Nobody and someone. So we still have choices, we still have volition, but those choices, those volitions are conditioned. So we might act in a certain way, and we might at some times in our lives be able to make decisions, but some people would say that those decisions are also conditioned, like deciding to be a good person, like deciding to come to a retreat. You've heard about Dharma somewhere. You've heard that Jhana Grove is having a retreat, and you're like, okay, I'm going on retreat, but those conditions have influenced you somehow, and that's what's brought you here. So it's like that for everything. Our upbringing, our parents, our society, our schooling, our experience all adds up to conditioning our lives, and that's who we are. We're the product of all of that conditioning, and it's always changing. So it's a heavy question to finish. There's this little one here, and it just says, how did you end up becoming a monk? Already answered. So I think it's time to go to bed. So I'm going to pay respects to the Buddha again by doing a little bit of chanting just to end the evening. And if you want to join in, you can. If you don't want to, it's also okay. Araham Samma Sambuddho Bhagava Buddhang Bhagavantang Abhivademi Bhakato Bhagavata Dhammo Yamang Namasami Supatipano Bhagavato Sāvaka Sankho Sanghang Namami. So enjoy your last night in beautiful Jhana Grove. Sleep well. Tomorrow, 5:30, I'll be in the hall. If you want to join, it's purely optional. 6:30 yoga, 7:30 breakfast, and then talk and some more meditation. So enjoy, do some more practice now if you like, or go to bed, do horizontal meditation, and I'll see you in the morning.